Hey everybody, welcome back to Tech Talk Education. This is Dr. Heldman. This is the second in my series of Linux movies. In this movie, what I want to show you is the Linux directory structure. We'll talk more about what that means, as well as some basic Linux commands. I'm going to be using Oracle VirtualBox and our Ubuntu Linux installation to illustrate these things to you. So this should be really informative and a lot of fun. Linux is a lot of fun. Let's get started. Now, when you're learning about Linux, you need to be aware that Linux is a file-based system, and it uses what are called directories. That's an old word. Today we would use the word folder, but Linux calls them a directory. Let me advance this slide. So Linux is a file-based system. What that means is that unlike Windows, which has a registry in it, the registry is a database that consists of hives and keys. It's quite large. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to know about the registry. Well, in this case, the registry is not what's being used in Linux. We're using just a file-based system. So you use a file for configuration on a device. You use a file for your IP configuration information. You use a file for a binary and so forth and so on. So it is a file-based system. The files reside in different directories, which of course today we would call a folder, and each directory has a specific purpose. Let's go take a look at that. So the top directory is called slash. Now when it's pointed this way to your right, it's called a slash key. It's on the keyboard, and it is where? Right next to the shift key, the right shift key. If it's facing this way, it's called a backslash. There is a definite difference in those two. And many students get that confused. So we're talking about a slash key. It's a forward slash. The next folder is called bin or binary. I call it bin or bin. And it contains all the binary executables. So what is an executable? So an executable is something that you can type in that begins to execute and run. And examples of that include the Linux ls command, the copy command, the move command. We'll see how to use those in just a minute because those are all common commands in the Linux structure. We have a boot folder or boot directory. This contains the files that are needed to boot Linux. This might be confusing to you. It's called dev. When I hear the word dev, I always think of developer, like software developer. This really means device. So these are files that describe different devices, such as your hard drive, USB, etc. This folder is super important. It's called etc. It stands for etc. It means and so forth. And etc. contains system-wide configuration files. So this is a super important directory to be aware of. And it's called etc. We pronounce it etc. The home folder here, the home directory, contains different directories for different users that are on the system. So Linux can support a multiplicity of users, and each user has a home folder and specific folders that are for that particular user. We have a folder or a directory called lib. Now this contains shared libraries and what are called kernel modules. Now the kernel is the nugget that is at the base of Linux that starts the entire Linux operating system. And so these contain kernel modules that are needed. There's one for 64-bit Linux as well, 64-bit lib, or lib. I call it lib. There's a thing called media. Now, there's an interesting topic. It's called a mount point. The idea with Linux is I've got a USB, but I cannot use it until I mount it. And so I'll talk about mount in just a minute, but there is this media directory, and it's used as a mount point for removable media like USBs or CDs. So we would have that in the media folder. However, when we mount something, we're mounting a file system. It's going to be mounted here. So there's a difference in the idea of, okay, I'm going to mount a file system so I can do some work, or I'm going to mount some media so I can do, get into a USB or a CD. Those are two different things. Now this thing opt is a directory called opt. It stands for optional. It contains optional software packages, third-party applications that you might install on the Linux OS. This one is called proc. It stands for procedure. And what it means is that we can access and look at what's running in the kernel. This is a very interesting directory. I would characterize it as an advanced directory. It's not something we need to know about right away. But at some point, somewhere along the line, you will wind up getting into proc and looking at the procedures that are running. Root is the home directory. Now, root is an important word. Root means that I am the super user on the system. I am the god of the system. I am the big guy on the system. And so there is a root home folder. That is different than a home folder for an average user, Sally or Bob or Ted or Sue or whoever. So root is a very specific home folder, and it's designated as root, or a directory, if you will. Run is a directory where the stores data for temporary file systems that need to be available at runtime. What does that mean? I'm an administrator, I log on, I mount a file system that I'm going to use for certain work, and so I'm going to use run, which is going to temporarily contain some of the data that I'm going to use for that. Now there's a thing called sbin. This directory contains system binaries, and these are executables again, but they're very specific executables. For example, they give you two examples here: fdisk, which means format disk, or ifconfig, which is going to give me my IP configuration information. And by the way, ifconfig has been replaced. That's an older command. In fact, with new Ubuntu, you'd actually be prompted to install it. But there are other commands for accessing IP address information. But anyway, ifconfig lives in sbin, the sbin directory. Serve is the directory that contains service information. What is a service? You can think of a service as a program that does a very, very specific job for you. For example, the print spooler, when you get ready to send a job to the printer, you say print. What happens is that print job is sent to what is called the print spooler, and the print spooler is a service that handles preparing the job and sending it out to the printer. Now they're called services in Windows. In Linux, they're called daemons. It's spelled D-A-E-M-O-N right there, daemons. Or a lot of people just call them demons. So either way works fine. It just depends on how you want to pronounce it. But when you hear the word daemon or daemon in Linux, we are talking about a service. And again, that's just a little piece of code that does some work for you for a very, very specific function or task. The sys directory is similar to proc. It provides information about hardware devices, kernel modules, and other system information. There are some commands that can allow you to get in and look at all of the different characteristics of your system, and so that's going to be a more advanced command, but it is out there. Temp is very interesting. So temp stands for temporary. This is an interesting directory. Hackers love this directory because they can place things inside temp and it does not get erased until reboot time. And so we could have some malware in there that's working because it resides inside the temp folder. So it's very, very appealing to hackers. And if you're watching any kind of hacking, ethical hacking YouTubes, there are a variety of YouTube stakeholders out there, influencers, that will use temp. You'll see them use the temp folder. So it's very appealing because it's a place where we can store things temporarily. It goes away at reboot time. So, when an administrator says, what's going on? I've got to get rid of this. They boot the server. Boom, the temp folder gets cleared out. There's a directory called user, and this is where your user installed software and utilities would go. So you go out, for example, to the Ubuntu store, and you download a piece of software, and a lot of that gets installed to the user folder. There's no E in user, it's USR. And then finally, the last guy is called var. It stands for variable, It means variable data files like logs and mail spools and things like that. Now, two of these folders have some subdirectories that you need to be aware of. The user folder has 4 specific directories that you should be aware of: user bin, user lib, user sbin, and user local. And then the var folder has var log, var mail, var spool, and var temp. So now that you've seen and you understand the file structure a little bit more, there are dozens of pictures out on the web for you that you can download and look at to get you more familiar with the file structure, the directory structure in Linux. Let's go have a look at what that's like to actually invoke some commands in Linux and to view some of these structures. Right then, so here I am in Ubuntu. This is version 24.04. And what is this? I don't remember the name of this creature, but anyway, Noble something, or Numbat, I think is what it is. What I'm going to do now is I had you place the terminal window in the GNOME taskbar here. It's called Dash. And I'm going to go ahead and invoke the terminal. You will wind up doing this quite a little bit in your work in Linux. A lot of what happens in Linux happens via the terminal. So I'm going to use the terminal here. Now you should be aware that this here, you have the ability to create a new terminal tab. You can see where I'm pointing to that tab icon. And then you can come in here and look at these other things that allow you to do some work within the terminal. The hamburger menu is called a hamburger menu. It's 3 lines going this way. The hamburger menu has something that you might be interested in. You might go to Preferences, and you can change the theme from dark to light, for example. And then you can also set the font for everything. So if you needed a bigger font, you could use it. So that might be useful for you, and you can save everything off as a profile. So if you get, you like everything you've set and you want to use it as your profile in your terminal, you can do that. You can also set shortcuts for it and so forth. And so that is the terminal. Now here is your very first Linux command. So you can see here that it's giving you a little helper here. It's saying that you might very often need to run as root, the root user. It's a very common thing. You are not currently root. Like my name is Bill and I'm a Bill-VirtualBox, but if I want to do something as root, I have to type in the command sudo. It stands for super user do. And so a lot of times you'll invoke a Linux command using sudo. We're not going to get there just yet because I want to talk about a couple of other things. So I'm going to show you your first Linux command. It is clear, and it's C-L-E-A-R. Clear clears the screen in your terminal. So all that does is clear the screen. I'm going to make this full screen here. And here is your next Linux command. So the command is ls. And by the way, most of these commands are in lowercase. Occasionally you'll see an uppercase switch that you pass into a command, but typically everything is lowercase. And so we're going to type in ls, and this stands for list structure. You can see here that it's color-coded. What happens if I change this to a white background? Will that be helpful if we show it in a light style instead? I don't know if it will. Yeah, because it doesn't show this background here. So you can see here that you have different folders. Now take a look. You've got a directory here, a folder called desktop. I am in the Bill home folder. I'll show you how you can tell that in just a minute. And I have, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 folders, 9 directories that are beneath me in my home. So I'm currently in my home folder, my home directory. My home directory is called Bill. This is my username. This is my machine name right here. I have a colon, and I have this thing right here. You can't see it very well. It's called a tilde. Tilde. So in Linux, tilde means home. You are at home. So here I'm in my home folder. I did an ls, It's showing me that I have a desktop directory, a documents directory, downloads, music, pictures, public, and so forth. And the real thing that I would want you to notice here is that these directories are proper case. What do I mean by that? Well, they have a capital at the very first beginning letter, all with the exception of this thing called snap. So Linux is case sensitive. So if I try to change into the desktop folder and I don't type in that capital D, it's not going to work. We'll get to that in just a minute, but I want to show you what that means. I want you to make sure that you're aware that Linux is case sensitive. It has to be a capital D. If you see a capital D, you've got to type in a capital D. Now that is a regular list structure. There's a way to list a structure in long format. I want to show you that, but I want to show you that if you have a command that you're looking at and you want to know more about it, you want to get some more detail about all of the different features of the command, you can type in the word man. So man is a Linux command. It stands for manual page. So it's just like you're working on a car, you know, you have your little Chevy manual and you're looking things up. It's exactly the same sort of idea. You have a manual page, and then you tell it what command you want to look up. So in this case, we want to look up everything that we need to know about the man command. That stands for manual page. And I hit enter, and there's your man page. We call it a man page. It's not sexist at all. It stands for manual. And as you scroll down through here, you can see that I have some options. So right here, I have options that I can enter in alongside the ls command. Now note to self, every Linux command will have one or more options. I don't think I've ever run into any that have none, but there's probably one or two that I'm not aware of. But most of them have these options, and what's really interesting today is that you might have a single letter option, and then you have an option where you spell out the word. Like here we have ls a dash a, and we have an ls dash dash all. Those are exactly the same command. And you're going to find this in Linux quite a bit. There is a single dash command, which is typically a single letter. And there's a double dash command, which is a word spelled out, or one or more words. Like, look at this, almost all, dash dash almost all. And that would be a capital A. You see that there? So this is very interesting to me. And you can look down through the man page and you can see all of the different options. You might hear somebody call this a switch. I used to call them switches in Windows. There's a switch that you can pass in that will get it to do something different for you. Some switches do not have a single letter. They just have a double dash there, like this. Some have two. Some have one. So you see here that we've got ls-l. I'm going to get out of the man page, and I want to show that to you. So I'm going to hit Q to exit the man page. How do I know that? Well, it's down here at the bottom of the screen, Q to quit, right there. So I just hit Q. That'll get me out of the man page. And I'm going to type in a new command. This is your third Linux command. It's ls, so we had clear, we have ls, and we have man. But in this case, I'm going to add on a switch. Now I'm going to start using a term that I like a great deal. So rather than saying dash L like that, I'm going to say tac L. Now when you're watching these YouTube influencers, those that are savvy with Linux will say tac L. I like that tac. I think that it just sounds cool, sounds very technical, so to say ls tac L is the same thing as saying ls-l, or God forbid ls-L. I've seen movies where people will say -L. All of those are the same thing. So tac-L just means to key in a hyphen or key in a dash. Let's see what that looks like. This is the same listing, except now it's showing you the folders here in proper case, but then it's also showing you more detail. Now here's a little bit of a surprise. We'll do this in a different movie, but you have to know what these things are showing you. Like you've got 10 bits over here, What are these all saying to you? What does that mean? We have to know about that. And so we'll have a movie on that. So that is the ls command. You can find out all of the switches that you need by typing in. So we can type in man for any command that we're interested in. For example, we could type in man clear, and it would give us the man page for the clear command. So that's what man does for you. And then we did an ls tackl, which is putting a switch or an option onto the end of the ls command. And what that does is give us additional information. Now, let's talk about a little bit more about this. So if I do a man ls, like so, I come down here and I can see that there's a tac-a or a tac-all. And what that means is show me everything in the file listing. So I'll clear the screen here with the clear keyword, and I will type in ls tac, and I want a long listing, but I want you to show me all the files, not just the pertinent files. So I hit this, and I want you to notice two things about this. First of all, you can bundle these switches together very often by putting them both together under a single tac or a single dash. Also, you get the long listing, but look at this now. You get some files here that start with a dot. So what dot means is that it is a hidden file. It's hidden from view. So if I do a normal ls like this, I can't see anything, but if I do an ls tac-al, I can see these hidden files. And there are hidden files, and there are hidden folders. For example, here's .local, and here is .ssh. Those are hidden folders, hidden directories. So that's pretty cool. So you can combine multiple options together. It just depends on the command. You'll have to play around with it, see what works for you. But as you're out there Googling different information about different commands, you'll find that they will give you, they will double up on these switch options here. And you can just put in a tac and put in multiple options if you want. Sometimes you'll see commands where it's option 1, tac this, tac that, tac the next. And those are, they're separated by a space. So yeah, I've seen it both ways. Now let's talk about another command. So this is cd. So if I do an ls, I can see that I have a folder in here called desktop. And so I'm going to change directories. cd stands for change directories. I'm going to change directories into the desktop folder. Now there's no slash required here. You're going to have a time when you need to key in a slash. Other times you do not need to key in a slash. What's the rule? Well, the rule is that if the directory is underneath you, like I'm here in my home folder, I can tell because I have a tilde right here. That little symbol right there is a tilde. I'm in my home folder, and desktop, documents, downloads, and so forth are beneath me in my home folder. I do not need a slash. I can just type in a space like that. And now you can see that it puts the slash in there for me. So here's my entire prompt. Tilde slash desktop. What is that telling me? It's telling me that I'm in my home folder, the Bill home folder, but I have moved into the desktop folder. And so now I'm in desktop. So if I do an ls here, I'm going to get a little bit different listing, which is nothing. There's nothing on my desktop right now. If I had, this is my desktop here, so if I had a file on my desktop, it would show up right now. So that's cd. Well, so what happens if we want to change to the root of the file structure? So what we would do is we would type in cd space, and we would put in a slash. Now that's a forward slash. Linux almost entirely deals with forward slashes. It's very, very rare that you're going to use a backslash in Linux. Windows is exactly the opposite. In Windows, you'll use a backslash mostly, and it's pretty rare when you use a forward slash. Now, I will tell you that in Windows, since Windows has moved to PowerShell, which is very Linux friendly, you can get away with using forward slashes in addition to backslashes. So let's change into the root. So I'm going to cd space slash. Now what that means is take me to the root folder, the very top of the hierarchy, the very top of the structure. And if you look here, my tilde has gone away and it's replaced by a slash. So now I'm at the top of the hierarchy, the directory structure. And if I do an ls here, I'm going to get quite a bit of different stuff here. I get different colors. I get this thing here, which is temp. It's in green. This is a file here. I can tell because it's in white. The folders are showing up in this blue-purple color. And you can see that I have folders like bin, and I have Etsy, and I have lib. So these folders show up here. Why? Because I've moved to the root of the file system. I can tell because I have a single slash there. And now I am looking at all of the folders or the directories that are beneath the root here. And you can see that there's a couple of others that we didn't talk about in the PowerPoint slide deck. Now what happens if I want to change into Etsy? So a cd space, but because the Etsy directory is beneath me, because I'm in root now and I'm looking down into the hierarchy, I can say cd space Etsy, and that will work just fine. So I hit enter, and now I'm in the Etsy folder, and I can do an ls. And if I do an ls, it's going to show me everything that's in, and it's huge. There's a whole bunch of stuff inside Etsy. So I'll clear the screen. We'll get into this later. I just wanted to show you this idea of navigating around. Now when you're doing a slash key, you're putting in a slash key, you're telling it go here and then go into this folder. I'll show you what I mean by that. If I want to immediately go home in Linux, Debian Linux like Ubuntu, Kali uses Debian Linux. There's a Debian Linux that you can download. Linux Mint uses Debian. So Debian's a very popular derivation of the Linux kernel. If I want to go home inside Ubuntu or other Debian Linux distros, I type in cd and then hit enter. And it will take me immediately home. cd enter takes me to my home folder. Now, suppose that I'm sitting in my home folder and I want to go into the root and I want to go into Etsy. So what you do is you type in cd for change directory, go into the root, that's the slash key, and now take me into Etsy. This is called absolute addressing rather than relative addressing. So if you have a folder underneath you and you want to move to that folder, like you're in your home folder and you want to move to desktop, you would say cd space cap desktop, and it will take you to a folder that is beneath you in your home folder. We did the same thing when we moved to the root. We moved to the folder, and then we said cd space Etsy. Why? Because Etsy is beneath. Now what we're doing is we're saying, hey, I want to go from my home into the Etsy folder, so I type in cd space slash Etsy, and that is called absolute addressing. So if I use a space, it's called relative address. If I use an absolute addressing, I have to put that slash in here, and now I'm in the Etsy folder. Okay, those are 4 or 5 basic commands in Linux that you need to know about. This movie's long enough. I'm going to conclude it here, but in the next movie we'll talk about some more advanced commands. So thank you for listening. If you like these movies, please share them with others. Subscribe to my channel. Tell others about my channel. Love having you guys on board and listening to these movies. You're free to leave a comment if you'd like. I love it when you comment on my videos. Thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you later.